The story of Hagar and Ishmael, her son, is given short shrift in the Hebrew Bible. It comes actually in two sections, and if you add up all the verses, it's maybe 12 in the book of Genesis. We're told that Sarah, the wife of Abraham, disliked Hagar, who was not only her slave, but who she had given to her husband as a wife in order for him to have an heir. Sarah mistreated her so much that Hagar runs away. An angel of God finds her at a spring of water and asks her where she is going. Vayimsa malach Adonai al ein hamayim b'midbar al ha'ayin b'derech shur. Vayomar Hagar shivchat Sarai imi zevat va'ana teilechi v'tomer mipnei Sarai givyarti anochi borachat. And Hagar explains that she's running away from Sarah, her mistress. And the angel implores her to return to Abraham and Sarah, explaining the following: you will be, your descendants, will greatly multiply, and they shall be too numerous to count. Look, Hagar, you are pregnant, says the angel, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael. God will listen. Vayomer la malach Adonai, hinach hara v'yoladet bein v'karata shmo Yishmael, ki shama Adonai et anecha. Hagar returns, and she gives birth to Ishmael. And even though Sarah by that time already has a son, Isaac, she becomes even more fearful and jealous of Hagar and Hagar's son. And she demands that Abraham exile them both to the wilderness. And Abraham places bread, a water skin, and Ishmael on Hagar's shoulders and casts her out. Vayashkem Avraham baboker vayikach lechem v'chamat mayim vayiten al Hagar sam al shachma v'tayeled vayesholchehu v'telech v'techa b'midbar ba'ar Sheva. Hagar wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba, and when the water in the skin was all gone, she placed her son under a bush, and she went and she sat a bit away from him, and she said, "Let me not see my child's death." And she sat, and she cried, and he cried in hunger and thirst, and she lifted her voice, and she wept. Vayishma Elohim et kol hanar, vayikra malach Elohim el Hagar min hashamayim, vayomer la, ma lech Hagar, al tirei, ki shama Elohim el kol hanar, ba'asher husham. And the divine heard the boy's cry, and from heaven an angel called to Hagar and said, "What is troubling you, Hagar? Have no fear, for the divine has heard you. Stand up and lift up your son, for I am going to make him a great nation." And then God opened her eyes, and she beheld a well. And she went and she filled the skin with water, and she gave the boy to drink. And the divine was with the boy as he grew up, and Hagar took him a wife from the land of Egypt. Now, earlier classical Jewish commentators say very little about Sarah and her son Isaac and Abraham's guilt in all of this. They say a great deal about them, but they do not condemn Sarah or Abraham for the horrible way in which, in fact, they both treated Hagar. So it is up to us to step back and reevaluate the story. To note that even our ancient commentators realized that Hagar was uniquely blessed. She was a special woman who, in fact, is only one of two women up to this point in the Bible to whom the divine speaks directly. But her story demands a reckoning. We must question and critique the behavior of Sarah. We must be reminded how anger and jealousy can overwhelm empathy and kindness, not just between two individuals, but between their descendants, between two peoples. And finally, we must raise up the memory of Hagar in all of our traditions. Though a slave, she risked her life to find freedom. She demonstrates the strength and the fortitude of women. Alone, she raises her son, chooses his mate, teaches him so that he can fulfill the promise of the divine angel to be the father of a great nation. She is, in fact, on Mother's Day, any day, a role model for women, a woman of independence, of strength, compassion, and fortitude.
Peace be with you. I love following on Aviva's words because I think sometimes we see our texts as being separate and distinct when they can also be seen as being synoptic and can be read together. And in fact, in the early years of the Prophet Muhammad's mission, he did not see himself as a prophet outside of the Hebrew tradition. He saw himself and the message that he brought as a message of continuity of the oneness of the divine. And so sometimes in the early years of his prophethood, he would, when people would ask him questions, he would say, go ask the rabbis. And so I think this is a lesson that we can continue to learn in our modern day, where we see ourselves as being separate and distinct. Getting on with my sermon, when Sherry asked me to give this sermon on Hagar, I thought to myself, well, it's Ramadan. How do I connect this? And so the connection is this, that Muhammad was not the first prophet that God spoke to in the area that we now know as Mecca. Now, many Muslims will not acknowledge female prophethood. I do, and the people in the movement that I'm connected with does. And I think this is where we can talk about patriarchy and how the role and the significance of women in our traditions are erased. And so part of the Islamic tradition talks of the signs of prophethood, and one of the signs of prophethood is where the angel Gabriel speaks to the messenger. And in the story of Hagar, the angel Gabriel speaks to her, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So we're in Ramadan right now, which celebrates the revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. And our traditions tell us that Muhammad was sitting in a cave just outside of Mecca when the angel Gabriel came to him and taught him to read or to recite or to proclaim. About 2.5 months after the end of the month of Ramadan is actually the pilgrimage, the Hajj pilgrimage season. And at the end of that pilgrimage is the celebration of the Eid al-Hajj or the Eid al-Qurban, the Eid of the pilgrimage or the festival of the pilgrimage or the festival of the sacrifice. And Muslims understand that sacrifice to be Abraham's sacrifice. Most Muslims understand it to be Abraham's sacrifice. But I actually think it's not Abraham's sacrifice. I actually think it's Hagar's sacrifice and Ishmael's sacrifice. So our traditions, Muslim traditions, tell us that God commanded or directed Abraham to take Hagar and their son Ishmael into the valley of Baqa, which is the valley of Mecca. But this is before Mecca existed. And I won't touch on the issues that Aviva has touched on around, and she didn't mention slavery, but we can talk about concubinage and slavery and all of that, and how these things still persist today, and how we must continue to challenge them and question our traditions around these issues. But he takes them there, and he just leaves them there with some food and water, and doesn't say anything. And he's walking away, and Hagar asks him, "What are you doing?" And she asks him 3 times, and he still doesn't reply. And then she says, "Has God told you to do this?" And then he says, "Yes." And she says, "Well, I trust in God, so that's fine. Be on your way." I'm ad-libbing, of course, right? And I'm paraphrasing. And so he leaves them there. And when her food and water run out and her baby is crying, she runs between these 2 hills, which still exist today in the valley where Mecca is situated. They're called Safa and Marwa. And the distance, if you run between them 7 times, the distance is approximately 3.5 kilometers. My husband and I went with my parents and my aunt to do the lesser pilgrimage, the Umrah, back in 2011. It's not only very hot, but the terrain on which she ran on is rock. And so it's hot, sand, hot, jagged rocks. And so this woman runs between these two hills back and forth 7 times. And after the 7th time, this is what one of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, a hadith, and it's a much longer narration, but just for the purpose of brevity. When she reached Marwa for the last time, she heard a voice, and she asked herself to be quiet and listened attentively. She heard the voice again and said, "Oh, whoever you may be, you have made me hear your voice. Have you got something to help me?" And behold, she saw an angel at the place of Zamzam, digging the earth with his wing, till water flowed from that place. She started to make something like a basin around it, using her hand in this way, and started filling her water skin with water with her hands, and the water was flowing. In Genesis, which Aviva quoted, the same narration or a similar narration is provided to us of the angel Gabriel coming to her and speaking to her. The fact that the angel spoke to her is not dealt with our theologians as a sign of prophethood for her. It's kindly forgotten. But had she let the waters of Zamzam flow without trying to control it, had she not scooped it up and created a basin, the water would have just disappeared back into the soil. But the well of Zamzam still flows today. They don't know its source. It continues to flow today, and it provides water for the millions of pilgrims who come to do the Hajj, and also for all the surrounding mosques all the way up to Medina. And it is this water that we are told that the angel Gabriel washed Muhammad's heart with. Twice, once when he was a child, and the second time before he ascended from Mecca to Jerusalem and then into the 7 heavens when he meets a number of his fellow prophets and talks to God. And so this water, there's a whole connection with water. And in our struggles today where we have water protectors, where people seem to have no respect for the fact that water is life and that all life comes from water. The significance of water in our traditions and its capacity to not only give life but to purify is, I think, entrenched in our traditions. The Quran in chapter 3 tells us the first sanctuary appointed for humankind was in Mecca, a blessed place, a guidance to the people. And I think this is also very significant. Today, the regime in Saudi Arabia does not allow non-Muslims to go to Mecca. And yet the Quran itself actually appoints this pilgrimage for all of humanity, not just for Muslims. It is not a tradition of Muhammad, it is the tradition of Hagar. So when you go to do your pilgrimage to Mecca, whether it's the Hajj or the Umrah, your pilgrimage is not complete unless you run between Safa and Marwa 7 times. So in contemporary Islam, we're told that this is the festival of the sacrifice of Abraham, but it's not Abraham's sacrifice. Because the sacrifice, a lot of Muslims will kill an animal at the end of the Hajj season, if they've been on pilgrimage or even if they've not been on pilgrimage. But the sacrifice of an animal is actually not required for your pilgrimage to be complete. It's actually completely a voluntary exercise. What is obligatory is the running between Safa and Marwa in the footsteps of our mother Hagar. Right? The difference also with the sacrifice is that our Quranic tradition actually tells us that when Abraham had this vision, he actually speaks to Ishmael and says, "I've had this vision. What do you think of it? What do you think I should do?" And Ishmael, being the son of Hagar, and I reflect back to her comment to Abraham when he first leaves her in the desert, has God commanded you to do this? And so Ishmael says the same thing, right? So it is their submission. It is not Abraham's submission. And the one thing I like about this story is that Abraham seems to have learned a little bit, because he didn't give Hagar a choice, right? He just basically dumped her in the desert. But at least he gave Ishmael a choice many years later and actually asked his opinion and said, what do you think about this vision that I have had? The tradition also tells us that once Hagar creates this well out of this spring of water, that eventually tribes come, and she is the custodian of this water, so they have to ask her permission to settle there. And eventually this settlement becomes the city of Mecca. And I think this is also significant. Before I get to that significance, an Islamic theologian by the name of Ali Shariati also tells us that, our traditions also tell us that Hagar is actually buried in the sanctuary of the Kaaba, of the mosque in Mecca. Both she and Ishmael are, by tradition, buried within the mosque sanctuary. This is an honor that is usually only reserved for prophets. And so again, all these signs of prophethood without actually ever anybody saying or acknowledging her agency as a prophet. And so Ali Shariati, a Quranic theologian or Islamic theologian, says, the Kaaba extends towards her grave. As a result, Allah's house is directed towards her skirt. Hagar has been given a place at his side and a room in his house, pardon the patriarchal language. He has come to her house and become her neighbor and her roommate. So now there are two, Allah and Hagar, under the ceiling of this one house. Hagar is the perfect immigrant. As pilgrims circumambulate the little black box called the Kaaba that you see in pictures, they're actually also going around her grave. So significant and profound is Hagar and her place in Islamic and monotheistic history that the Quran directs Muhammad to proclaim to humankind the pilgrimage, not just to Muslims, but to all of humanity. A Sufi saint by the name of Bawa Muhayyiddin said of the Hajj, it is millions of people coming together in one love, in oneness, millions of people recreating the experiences of a homeless single mother, Hagar, peace be upon her, and her baby Ishmael, peace be upon him. She calls on us to run between the hills. She calls on us to search for the waters springing up to life. And what I liked about this quote is that he actually uses the honorific that is reserved for prophets, peace be on them. Hagar's quest for water in the face of hopelessness manifests both love and faith that we must reenact and exemplify in our performance of faith in our everyday sacrifices. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is actually the story of Hagar. The story of Hagar is a story of a defiant, nonconformist, outcast, black African woman who survived and excelled despite the odds to provide for herself and her child. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, the ideal immigrant is the one who behaves like Hagar. He also said that the ideal immigrant that he speaks of is an active agent of social change, an environmentalist who found and conserved water, a single mother who ensured a life and future for her child, an enslaved royal who built a city, and the spiritual mother to billions who had unqualified faith in her Creator for a better tomorrow. She is mother to all of us. We are all her Ishmael. She is the founder of the city of Mecca. Zamzam flows for her. She is the mystic source of Zamzam. Without Zamzam, there would have been no Mecca. Without Mecca, no Quraysh, which is the tribe that Muhammad came from. Without the Quraysh, there would have been no Muhammad. And without Muhammad, there would have been no Islam. So in our strife-ridden world, should we not as believers think of humanity as the baby Ishmael destined for death, to save through commitment, dedication, love, and restless passion as exemplified by our mother, Hagar, peace be upon her. Happy Mother's Day.